You have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to define your purpose from the start and wire it deeply into the operations of your business. First of all, thank you very much for giving me this platform and the opportunity to speak to you, to your audience. Feels like a fantastic privilege and an opportunity to really reach out to people that have interest in food systems, which is something that unconsciously I've spent probably 20 years of my career, and consciously now the past 5, 6, 7 years are getting really into the grind, trying to understand as to what can be done in order to bring something much more positive about than what we currently have. So on that note, probably it's worthwhile kind of explaining the two sort of activities that we do that are probably a little bit more consumer centric and focused. One is the Nutritional Paradox, which is our sort of non-for-profit initiative. It is our open source platform, whereby we share as to how we experience and we see the agri-food world on a global basis, with all the, let me say, devastating data points that we hear every now and so often. And we have also gone into kind of thinking things through as to how a future could look like if one would start developing something that is probably a little bit more refreshed and new. So that is our open source, our non-for-profit sort of an activity. And then we have our hardcore commercial company that essentially is called WhatIf Foods. We are a new kid on the block. And what we actually try to do is WhatIf Foods aims to actually take on the nutritional paradox. And essentially what we preach on the one side is what we execute and action up on the other side. And in short, it is all about what we call 360 sustenance, which stands for our strive to identify crops that are beneficial for human consumption, meaning that they actually mean an aid towards a diversified diet in today's day and age. But these crops need to grow on degraded arable land in challenged soils, poor soils. The reason is, and I probably can speak about those in a few minutes, but we have plenty of land banks available to us that are not productive anymore. And by doing so, we hit a number of smallholder farming communities, make them stronger, much more resilient, and bring them back into a meaningful livelihood. That's what we call 360 sustenance. And in order to actually live up to that promise, one has to actually put a number of research work and development into the system, because as you know, over the past 150 years, all our industries have focused on these few crops and have specialized only on efficiencies. And probably even the smallest chain in supply chain today, for a wheat miller, for example, is already a challenge. So therefore, one cannot assume that on large scale, you can actually make use of these wonderful crops that are out there. So in short, that is what we're doing. That's what brings us to the office, pre and hopefully post-COVID, on a daily basis. It is a 105 billion portion category. So therefore, it's a significant market size. It's enormous, gigantic volumes that are being produced on instant noodles. The large majority of the instant noodles are deep fried using palm oil as a deep frying oil. Now, when we got started, we thought, our research question was, so what if we can actually take the deep fryer out of a factory? What sort of new possibilities can we create? And by thinking that way, what we have understood very early on is that if we actually take the deep fryer, the oil out, we are saving quite a nice amount of frying oil, not only in terms of volume and product in the instant noodle, because if you deep fry something, it picks up oil up to 18, up to 20% in instant noodle, in the case of instant noodles. So there's a significant raw material cost in the instant noodle. And if you take the deep fryer out, that cost is not there. And that cost we can then, or that saving, we can then use to actually make use of the Barbara groundnut, for example, or our moringa, to include that in the process. By doing that, we had to actually invent a process that is commercially viable and can replace, economically viable, the deep fryer. which is a heavy lifting because deep frying takes you 3.5 minutes, whereas air drying takes you 35 minutes. For a voluminous product like this, it would mean like 10 times the size of factories, or you suffer 10 times the capacity, which both is not economically viable. That is where our research went into, and that's what we essentially have done. And taking the deep fryer out means that you are basically changing the possibilities, the horizon, and you open up all of a sudden inclusions that you otherwise cannot do. And it's very, very exciting, to be honest. I grew up on a farm in Austria, and I've seen what it means to basically just focus on one product on a farm. It means that you're so vulnerable to swings in the market. You are a farmer today, irrespective of where you are, most unlikely has bargaining power. So what we are doing is we are trying to create markets for these orphan crops, forgotten crops, or how you want to call it, or crops for the future, if you want to call it. We call them future fit crops. We create markets for them so that the action that we actually undertake with smallholder farming communities, for example, in West Africa, is sustainable through the creation of business and demand creation, so that it becomes a system, a new ecosystem in its own right, and then has that positive effect of a snowball effect, essentially. That's what we are trying to do. Because in my experience, approaching the system from a CSR point of view, more frequently than not, ends up in somebody giving seeds for somebody to grow something, and then what? Then I've grown it, but where's the market? Can I grow it again next year? If so, where's the buyer? Where is the income from that? And several initiatives that I have seen in the past have utterly failed because of missing markets. And if the markets are not there, there's no price finding mechanism, and so on and so forth. So we are leading from essentially the concept of helping consumers diversify their diets through products that grow on these degraded arable land, so that we actually help the farming communities. So it's an end-to-end solution, trying to create win-wins on all sorts of fronts, and being very, very mindful of a profitability of the organization, because unless and until we give back to the shareholders, we won't be sustainable either. So it is all about that in reality. So there are additional costs, but there are many, many profit pool opportunities, as I call them. The additional costs come from economies of scale. These crops that we are investigating and work with, such as, for example, the Bambara groundnut, grows today in West Africa in tiny, tiny small places, and therefore is rather expensive. The yields per hectare are just not there where commercial crops are today. So that would actually exclude the commercial use of these crops to start with, if you do not have the liberty to redesign comfort food. And this is what WhatIf Foods is all about. It's essentially thinking about what can we do to make, say, convenience food more, I don't want to say healthier, but nutritious. How can we help consumers through the offering that we create without much of change of consumer habits? Because this is always a problem. You try it one time, yeah, I do it. I go in the kitchen, I cook, but then I go back to my usual life, and then I'm falling back into the old traps. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to think, so what sort of products can we actually redesign and rethink completely, so that we create new profit pools that allow us then to capture that money that we kind of save by redesigning, and make use of that additional money to actually then do good with the farming communities. So at the end of the day, we still try to be affordable to all by thinking it the way I've just explained, and I hope it is somewhat clear, so that therefore actually the compensation to the farming communities is just and fair. For one second, we aim to speak to the farmers as close as we possibly can, even if they are the smallest of the smallest. We probably have a village aggregator in between, but we are speaking to them directly. So that means that we eliminate a lot of the supply chain intermediaries, and therefore save money on that part as well. But be rest assured, this sort of undertaking just costs a lot of money. It is not a cheap undertaking, but therefore rethink and redesign comfort food for under these aspects as well. So there's a lot of science and a lot of technology that is required in order to do so. I think what we are trying to do is we are trying to use the power of regenerative agriculture and the selection of what we call future fit crops. Crops that are beneficial to human consumption, are beneficial and aid towards a diversified diet, plus crops that actually grow on these degraded arable lands, particularly with smallholder farming community context. Because if that is the case, then the work that is actually being put in place on farms is becoming meaningful again. The income is more diverse, hence the entire community becomes more resilient. And some sort of as a byproduct, one actually rejuvenates the soil quality because you're bringing the ability to the farm to do crop rotations. Because don't forget, today we are living from such few crops only, it becomes increasingly difficult to actually find crops with markets that actually help us do rotation cropping and what have you. So in that way, yes, it is about soil quality, but we are not investigating for soil quality. We are investigating for crops that actually grow on this degraded arable land. Sustainability is a very, very broad term, and many, many people define it in several different aspects and avenues and whatever it means for them. What we have done is we have looked around us. I'm talking to you out of Singapore, and we are basically Singapore is sandwiched between the two largest palm oil producers in the world, Malaysia and Indonesia. And if you go on a road trip from Singapore to KL, you will see palm plantation after palm plantation after palm plantation, and it got us going to think about, so what's happening here, right? So of course we have lost primary forest already, but what is happening now? So in that context, we actually started to worry about degraded arable land because intensive agriculture leaves a lot of land unproductive behind. And if I may, I just share a few data points that probably are not in day-to-day discussion. So as you probably know, 2.6 billion people today are still directly connected to agriculture on a global basis. So we kind of seem to forget that, particularly in the developed world, because you see probably a village and then you have 3 farmers there. But 2.6 billion people are still directly connected to agriculture and make a living off it. Interestingly, 74% of these people are the poorest of the poor. And because they are so poor, they are living off very, very small land parcels, sometimes a couple of acres. And that's how they have to make ends meet for themselves. Now, if you think about that, and if you know that 52% of arable land today is already severely degraded or degrading at a speed unseen in history before, we're talking about 35 times the recorded degradation of land ever seen in humankind, in human history. It's insane how much arable land we actually lose because it becomes commercially unviable. With it, soil degradation takes place, with it, topsoils get lost, and we are losing soil, species, and what have you, all the rest of it. Now, if you translate that into some sort of a bite-size indicator, then probably it's worthwhile remembering that this actually represents 23 soccer fields every minute on a global basis, is what we lose of arable soil. Interestingly, roughly the same amount of 30 soccer fields, roughly the same size of primary forests gets lost, because the intensive agriculture in today's day and age is hungry for arable land. And in order to fuel the current system, one has to take out the primary forest to make use of the fresh arable land in order to produce what we currently produce. And that is just insane. If you think about, we are cutting down our primary forests, the lungs of our planet, and at the same token, we're leaving all this land behind. So it doesn't make sense, particularly if you think about that in 2050, we have to feed about 10 billion people. And if we don't stop that trend, we have to knock down 2.5 times the size of India, of primary forests, 2.5 times the size of India in order to feed that population. That is insane. By thinking about that, we also know that the way we are feeding, the way we are producing food today is not really healthy. Now, because if you look at 2.3 billion people today are overweight and obese. They are struggling from diabetes, heart attacks, cardiovascular diseases, bowel cancer, colon cancer, you name it. They're all related to the diet that we are consuming. 2.3 billion people. About 800 pre-COVID, that number has grown. 800 million people are hungry. They starve. It's a very, very bad figure. Foremost of all is that we all need to recognize that alone we can't fix it. However hard we try at our company, it is a heavy, heavy lifting. It is like pushing water up the hill continuously, and it keeps on flowing down on you. So acknowledging, and I'm speaking to all stakeholders, be it policymakers, be it supply chain managers, be it distributors, consumers, consumer group advocates, and what have you. We need to recognize that in order to systematically go about rectifying what is broken, we have to have a system approach to it. That is number one, because more frequently than not, honestly, I see that people decide something. Let me just give you an example. People decide in Europe that all of a sudden biofuels are bad, and they stop subsidizing biofuels in the European Union or in Europe. And what happened on this side of the world is that it actually caused more deforestation, right? Because if you are a smallholder farmer and you are relying on one income and then the subsidies fall away without the opportunity to grow something else to make up for the income that you have lost, what's the thing you do? You go into the forest, you burn it down, put more palm trees up in order to harvest more palm fruits. You see, there's an intent on one side, but please start thinking systems through and acknowledge the fact that your action, which might be a good intent, leads to exactly the opposite outcome because you haven't appreciated the system on a global basis. So it is very, very complex, very, very heavy. So many different products, so many different chains, so many trades make it really, really difficult to understand it, understand it at all. So if I would be able to have a wish list and say, so what is it that we need to do, is that we need to embrace SDG17. SDG17 means partnerships, means coming together and listening to each other, not only to be heard, but listening to be understood, to understand, to onboard, and to build on each other's knowledge so that the ultimate outcome takes into consideration much more than just one dimension of the system, which then probably doesn't achieve the outcome that we want. So I think, and this is what I, particularly now, because of COVID-19 and the recession we are in, I see just having come to a grinding halt. That's how I feel about it, simply because we have other things to worry about, you know, our well-beings, public health, and all the connected issues to the financial markets, to the cash reserves in businesses, and all of that are of course much more urgent in nature than thinking about the system behind us. But as we come out of it, as we come out of the recession, hopefully in a couple of years, and if we come out of COVID-19, we need to go back and think hard about how can we actually together in partnership change the system fundamentally from the bottom up. Think it through thoroughly with the help of many, many players in the room, rather than just trying to do it alone. Typically, I say to people who want to start a business, I say try to identify your purposeful advantage. Try to see beyond your competitive advantage or your competitive advantage. You know, typically for researchers, try to think beyond intellectual property, IP and patents. Try to think about a purposeful advantage. In other words, work hard to identify what the purpose of your business is all about. What is the issue that you're taking on, right? WhatIf Foods is all about SDG 15, life on land. If you don't figure that out, we can't stop deforestation. If we don't figure that out, we can't stop the depletion of water tables falling down. And all of that stuff, it's all about SDG 15, life on land. It's not SDG 3 or SDG 2, hunger and well-being. That's a result, is an outcome. But the action that gets us there is SDG 15. And we're enabling it through conversations SDG 17. So back to your question. If you are an upcoming entrepreneur and you would like to put something in place, work on your purposeful advantage. Think about what is it that the society and the civil society needs by and large. What is it that we need to do? There's a good guide with the SDGs that are out there. Think about what you have in terms of resources, your own passion. Try not to be fooled around, I have this idea and I have all these butterflies in my stomach and I want to do something. Hang on a second, calm down, relax. You know, if you meet somebody for the first time, you know, if you fancy a girl, you have butterflies. But are these butterflies lasting for an entire generation? Can you marry and be home with your idea for a long period of time? This is something that is very, very important. I made that mistake when I was a young guy and my first venture failed because I was making decisions based on butterflies in my stomach. It didn't last long and I've lost money. So don't do it. So appraise your skills, resources, appraise your competitive sort of edge that you try to identify. And then kind of marry these two aspects with regards to the community, social impact, green impact, planet health, and that with your own passion, marry that with consumer needs. And once you have identified these three areas, there's an overlapping spot. That is your purpose. And then run with it. Don't deviate from it, run with it. I mean, of course, you have to appraise whether or not it makes sense financially and blah, 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 and all of that stuff, but that is business planning. I'm trying to help people to say, you know, identify future businesses based on purposeful advantage. That's what we have done. And honestly, it gets me out of bed every day in the morning and it puts me down in bed saying, oh, I've done something today. I'm feeling happy about it. I'm looking forward to waking up the next day morning and doing it again. And I think that is what is required in order to be sustainably on the ball, because trust me, there are too many sharks out there. They all want to eat your pie. You're not the only one who is out there. There's competition and it's not easy, you know, it's not easy out there. At the beginning of a business, you have a once in a lifetime opportunity to define your purpose from the start and wire it deeply into the operations of a business. So it doesn't become a statement. It is actually your DNA of the company.